Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of 7 Days Inside Borderline. I'm Kyle Lincoln, a counselor in Salem, Massachusetts. I'll be your host for these 7 episodes. Joining me is my co-host Kellen, who handles billing and marketing at my practice.
Hi everyone, I'm excited to be part of this series. I'll be asking questions, keeping us on track, and learning alongside all of you.
Thanks, Kellen. Before we dive in, I want to share a quick note. My specialty as a counselor is on treating anxiety and trauma. I do work with clients who identify with BPD, and it's pushed me to get training and learn from their experience, which I'm eager to turn around into this podcast. Podcasts are such a great way to share knowledge and help you to get to know me if you are looking for a counselor. It's also meant to provide educational resources. Remember, this is for information only, not a replacement for professional counseling. So if you're struggling with any of the issues we discuss, everything from what BPD feels like to how it's treated, I encourage you to reach out to a professional and use the resources we mention.
Kyle, we have a lot to cover on day 1. Where should we begin?
Let's start with a broad overview. What BPD is, how it was historically misunderstood, and what the different subtypes might look like. Later, we'll also explore how people with BPD both need and fear close relationships, creating real paradoxes in personal life and in therapy. So think of this episode as laying the groundwork for the whole series.
Sounds good. Okay, so I've heard the term borderline personality disorder used so casually, almost like an insult. Maybe to describe a person being dramatic about something, but I know there's more to it. So why do we even call it borderline?
That's a really good question. In a lot of ways, the label is outdated. The label borderline was used about a century ago. At that time, doctors used it to describe people that didn't quite fit the diagnostic categories, like not schizophrenia, not just anxiety, but something in the middle that maybe shares some qualities of both. You know, we understand things differently today, but the term stuck.
So the name doesn't really reflect what we know now.
Exactly. When we are talking about BPD, borderline personality disorder, we're typically describing something that involves 3 main struggles that are pervasive and really are ongoing for a person. They're deep in their personality. So first, intense emotional swings. Second, a deep fear of rejection or abandonment. And third, a difficulty managing a stable sense of self. So it's like living with your emotions that are turned up to maximum volume, but without a clear sense of how to turn that dial back down.
Okay, so it's about feeling intense emotions, being afraid of losing people, and not always knowing who you are?
That's a good summary, but let me clarify, because I'm sure that 100% of people navigate these things. The intense emotions aren't just strong, but they can feel overwhelming or unmanageable. The fear of losing people isn't just about worrying. It's a deep sense of panic that can trigger strong reactions. And the difficulty with identity isn't just uncertainty. It can feel like a complete lack of a stable sense of self. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, so do we have some examples to bring this to life?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we worked out 2 case studies, Elena and Marcus. Elena's an introvert. Marcus is an extrovert. These are hypothetical cases, but they highlight how these patterns of BPD show up differently. So Kellen, why don't you tell us a little about Elena?
Okay, so Elena is a graphic designer who loves expressing herself through art. She cherishes her close friendships, but she's often overwhelmed by the fear that she'll do something to drive her friends away. From the outside, Elena appears quiet and thoughtful, but inside, her emotions can feel like a whirlwind.
Marcus, on the other hand, is a high-energy sales manager who thrives on competition and enjoys motorcycling on the weekends. He's charismatic, quick to make friends, but he's also deeply sensitive to criticism and has a hard time managing conflict in his personal relationships. Marcus loves the thrill of his job, but struggles with the intense highs and lows that come with it.
They sound pretty different. Elena seems introspective while Marcus is more outgoing.
Exactly. And their differences are part of what makes BPD so complex. So let's look at those 3 hallmarks and each of their experience with them, starting with intense emotional swings.
So for Elena, emotional swings often feel internal and overwhelming. A small disagreement with a coworker might leave her feeling deeply ashamed, thinking something like, "I'm the problem. Everyone will leave me eventually." When she's overwhelmed, she isolates herself, canceling plans and spiraling deeper into feelings of hopelessness. Her emotions can shift rapidly from sadness to shame, making it hard for her to recover from even minor conflicts.
Marcus also experiences emotional swings, but his reactions are more external. After a stressful day at work, he might get into an argument with his partner over something minor, like forgetting to take out the trash. That argument could escalate quickly because Marcus feels unappreciated, and his frustration spills out as anger. His emotions move from frustration to guilt in minutes, leaving him feeling drained and misunderstood.
So for Elena, the emotions are more internal, and for Marcus, they come out in his interactions with others.
Right, both experience emotional intensity, but it shows up in different ways. So, let's move on to the second characteristic, fear of rejection or abandonment.
For Elena, this fear of rejection or abandonment often leads her to overthink and withdraw. For example, if her best friend cancels plans, Elena might immediately think, she doesn't want to be my friend anymore, and stops reaching out altogether. Her fear creates distance, even though she deeply wants connection.
Marcus, on the other hand, acts impulsively when he fears rejection or abandonment. If his partner doesn't respond to his text messages quickly, he might send a string of follow-ups or accuse them of ignoring him. He often pushes people away, even though he's trying to hold on to them.
So it's like their fear causes them to act in ways that bring about the very thing they're afraid of.
That's exactly right. This fear can be a self-fulfilling prophecy if it's not addressed. The last category is an unstable sense of self.
Elena often feels like she doesn't know who she is outside of her relationships. She has close friendships and tries to see her friends at least 3 times a week. When she does, she feels confident and valued. But if her friends are busy, or even if she's busy, she might spiral into self-doubt, wondering if she's even worth being friends with. Her identity feels fragile and dependent on external validation.
For Marcus, instability shows up as a constant need to prove his worth through achievements. After closing a big sale, he feels on top of the world. But if a deal falls through, he's filled with self-doubt and frustration. His identity feels tied to his successes and failures, leaving him vulnerable to the highs and lows of his work life.
So for both of them, their sense of self depends a lot on what's happening around them.
Yes, without a stable sense of self, it's easy to shift core parts of yourself based on what others say or life circumstances. But recognizing these struggles is the first step towards finding better ways to manage them.
So to recap, we've talked about 3 core aspects of BPD: intense emotional swings, a deep fear of rejection or abandonment, and a difficulty maintaining a stable sense of self. How do these patterns play out in relationships?
Relationships are a big part of the experience with BPD. For both Elena and Marcus, connection is crucial, but it's also where things feel most vulnerable. This creates what I call the paradox of closeness. They deeply want connection, but at the same time, they're terrified of rejection or abandonment. For example, Marcus might interpret a quiet moment from his partner as, they don't care for me anymore, even if it's just a bad day. That fear can lead him to lash out or act impulsively, not because he doesn't love his partner, but because he's trying to protect himself from getting hurt.
And what about Elena? She seems to handle things differently.
That's right. Elena's fear often turns inward. Let's say her best friend cancels plans. Instead of saying how she feels, Elena might think, I must have done something wrong, and pulls back. She might stop replying to texts or avoid reaching out, which only reinforces her fear of being abandoned.
It sounds like both of them are caught in a cycle, wanting closeness but reacting in ways that make it harder to stay connected.
Exactly. That's one of the most challenging parts of BPD. This fear of abandonment can even show up in therapy. Imagine Marcus or Elena starts trusting their therapist, but then a session gets rescheduled. That small change might feel like a rejection, making them want to quit therapy altogether. Not because they don't want help, but because it feels safer to leave before they're let down.
That's a really tough cycle. So how do they start to break it?
It's not easy, but it is possible. Therapies like DBT or dialectical behavior therapy help by teaching 2 key skills: acceptance, accepting that their pain and fear is real, and learning new ways to respond to those fears or pain. For Marcus, That might mean pausing when he feels overwhelmed and asking himself, is my partner really pulling away, or could they just be tired? For Elena, it might mean sharing her feelings with a friend instead of withdrawing. Hey, I felt a little hurt when you canceled. Are we okay?
It sounds like the right tools and support make a huge difference.
They really do. The paradox of closeness is tough, though, but it's also the key to healing. With patience, support, and the right skills, people with BPD can learn to feel safe in their relationships again.
We've covered a lot today, from the history of BPD to how it shows up in daily life and relationships. Can you give us a quick preview of what's coming up in the rest of the series?
Absolutely. In episode 2, we'll focus on navigating relationships, why closeness can feel scary, and how to build healthier connections. In episode 3, we'll explore managing emotions, learning practical skills to handle intense mood swings. In episode 4, we'll address self-harm and suicidal thoughts. In episode 5, we'll talk about treatment options and how to find what works best for you. Episode 6 shifts the focus to supporting someone else with BPD, showing how to be an ally without losing yourself in the process. Finally, in episode 7, we'll focus on the day-to-day, life with BPD, how to grow, find balance, and create a meaningful life.
Sounds like a solid plan. I'm glad we're diving deeper into relationships next, because that came up a lot today. I think people will also want to hear about treatment and how loved ones can help.
Definitely. Relationships, treatment, and support are huge topics. If you're listening and see yourself in what we've described, I hope you know there's real reason to believe in progress. BPD isn't just a label, it's a range of experiences that can improve with the right support.
That's a really encouraging message. We've touched on the stigma, the confusion about the term borderline, and the ways BPD can complicate emotions and relationships. But you kept coming back to one truth. It's treatable.
Exactly. Nobody is stuck forever in the hardest parts of BPD. Yes, it can feel overwhelming, but there's always a way forward. Therapy and supportive relationships can make a huge difference.
Thanks for laying the groundwork, Kyle. I'm excited for episode 2.
And thank you, Kellen. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Until next time.
Bye!